Welcome to TrueCrime Unveiled Podcast. Dive deep into the mysteries that captivate us. If you appreciate this episode, please consider liking and subscribing to support us. November 5th, 2009, Fort Hood, Texas. A seemingly ordinary day on one of the largest U.S. military bases in the world. Soldiers going about their routines, preparing for deployments, attending medical appointments. The atmosphere, while always structured and disciplined, held no outward signs of the impending tragedy. Beneath the surface, however, a storm was brewing. A storm in the mind of one man that would soon unleash chaos and leave an indelible scar on the nation. This is the story of the Fort Hood shooting, a complex and disturbing case that continues to raise questions about mental health, radicalization, and the vulnerabilities within our own defense systems. We'll unravel the events leading up to the attack, examine the perpetrator's background, and analyze the devastating aftermath. The location itself, Fort Hood, is significant. A sprawling complex, a city within a city, designed to train and deploy thousands of soldiers. The sheer scale of the base contributes to a sense of anonymity, a vast machine where individuals can sometimes feel lost in the system. This environment, while providing structure and purpose for many, can also, perhaps, exacerbate existing vulnerabilities for others. It's crucial to understand this backdrop to grasp the context of the events that unfolded. We'll be delving into the unique pressures and challenges faced by those stationed at Fort Hood, and how these factors might have played a role in the tragedy. Major Nidal Hasan, an Army psychiatrist, was stationed at Fort Hood's Soldier Readiness Processing Center. His role was to evaluate the mental health of soldiers preparing for deployment or returning from combat zones. Ironically, he himself was struggling with his own internal conflicts. Reports suggest that Hasan had expressed concerns about his impending deployment to Afghanistan, where he feared he might be forced to treat enemy combatants. He had also allegedly communicated with Anwar al-Awlaki, a prominent al-Qaeda figure known for his extremist views. These details, though fragmented at the time, begin to paint a picture of a man grappling with a divided loyalty and a growing internal crisis. We'll examine these early warning signs and question whether they could have been recognized and acted upon to prevent the tragedy. Before the tragedy struck, Fort Hood was a picture of routine and order. The sprawling base, nestled in the heart of Texas, was a community in itself, a microcosm of military life. The rhythm of daily life was punctuated by the sounds of reveille, the marching cadence of soldiers in formation, and the steady hum of activity that characterized a military installation. Families lived in neat rows of housing, children played in well-maintained parks, and the aroma of barbecue often drifted from backyard gatherings. It was a place where camaraderie and shared purpose were palpable, where people looked out for one another, and the bonds of service created a strong sense of belonging. The atmosphere was generally one of quiet discipline and focused energy, interwoven with the everyday joys and challenges of family life. There was a sense of predictability, of order, that permeated the base, a sense of stability that made the events of November 5, 2009, all the more jarring. Major Nidal Hasan, the perpetrator of the shooting, was an Army psychiatrist assigned to the Darnall Army Medical Center at Fort Hood. Outwardly, he appeared to be a dedicated and competent medical professional. He held a high rank, indicative of years of service and specialized training. Hasan had a regular routine, attending to his patients, participating in staff meetings, and engaging in the typical activities of a medical officer. There were, however, underlying currents of unease that began to surface in the months leading up to the attack. Some colleagues noted a change in his demeanor, a growing detachment, and occasionally, expressions of concerning views. These observations, while troubling in retrospect, did not at the time suggest the imminent potential for violence. They were subtle shifts in behavior, easily overlooked amidst the bustling activity of a busy medical facility. The contrast between Hasan's outward professional life and his internal struggles created a complex and disturbing backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. Many of the victims were young soldiers, some just beginning their military careers, full of hope and ambition. They had answered the call to serve, driven by patriotism and a desire to protect their country. They were undergoing training, preparing for deployments, or returning from tours of duty overseas. Their days were filled with rigorous physical exercises, tactical drills, and classroom instruction. They formed tight bonds with their fellow soldiers, forged in shared experiences and the common pursuit of a challenging goal. They dreamed of the future, of returning home to their families, of building successful lives after their service was complete. Their lives were a testament to the dedication and sacrifice that characterize military service, and their loss represents a profound tragedy for the nation. The Soldier Readiness Processing Center, where the shooting occurred, was a hub of activity. It was a place of transition, where soldiers prepared for deployment or returned from duty overseas. On that fateful day, the center was bustling with personnel. Soldiers were undergoing medical checks, completing paperwork, and receiving briefings. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a mix of excitement and apprehension as soldiers prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. Families gathered to bid farewell to loved ones, offering words of encouragement and support. The atmosphere was charged with the emotional weight of departure and reunion, a familiar scene at military installations across the country. The sudden eruption of violence shattered this atmosphere, transforming a place of transition into a scene of unimaginable horror. We've painted a picture of Fort Hood, a sprawling base, a community in itself, a place where soldiers trained, lived, and connected. November 5th, 2009, began like any other day. The sun rose over the Texas landscape. Soldiers went about their routines, preparing for deployments, attending medical appointments, grabbing breakfast at the mess halls. There was an air of normalcy, the rhythm of military life, a predictable cadence. The Soldier Readiness Processing Center, or SRP, was a particularly busy hub, a crucial stop for soldiers preparing for deployment. It was a place of medical checks, paperwork, and final preparations before heading overseas. Imagine the scene: soldiers in uniform, the hum of conversation, the rustling of paperwork. It was, to all appearances, an ordinary Thursday, but as we know, this ordinary day held a darkness waiting to be unleashed. Yes, and it's within this ordinary scene that we start to see the subtle cracks, the hints of something amiss. Witnesses later described an unusual tension in the air, a sense of unease that they couldn't quite place. Some reported seeing Major Nidal Hasan, the individual at the center of this tragedy, acting strangely. He was seen giving away personal belongings in the days leading up to the shooting: furniture, copies of the Quran. While these actions might have seemed charitable to some, in retrospect they take on a different significance. There were also reports of Hasan expressing extremist views in the months prior, raising red flags that, tragically, weren't fully investigated. These subtle disruptions to the ordinary, the tension, the unusual behavior, begin to paint a picture of a brewing storm. Let's talk more about that sense of foreboding. One witness recounted seeing Hasan in the SRP building shortly before the incident, appearing agitated, his face described as vacant. Others reported seeing him carrying a large bag, which later turned out to contain the weapons he used in the attack. While no one could have predicted the scale of the tragedy about to unfold, these seemingly small details, viewed in hindsight, create a chilling mosaic of warning signs. They underscore the importance of recognizing and addressing even subtle shifts in behavior, particularly in high-stress environments like a military base. The atmosphere of the SRP building that morning, typically bustling with activity, began to shift. Witnesses later described a growing sense of anticipation, a palpable tension in the air. They recalled the ordinary sounds of the processing center, the murmur of conversations, the clicking of keyboards, slowly fading into an unnerving silence. The mundane routines of the day were about to be shattered. The calm before the storm, so to speak. And it's in these moments of quiet, in the shadow of the ordinary, that the tragedy began to unfold. In this segment, we delve into the tragic events of November 5, 2009, at Fort Hood, Texas. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday afternoon, but within hours, it would become a scene of unimaginable horror. The location was the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, a bustling hub where soldiers prepared for deployment or returned from overseas. Witnesses described a chaotic scene erupting around 1:30 p.m. Gunfire shattered the routine, sending soldiers and civilians scrambling for cover. The initial reports were fragmented and confused, with some believing it was a training exercise gone wrong. However, the grim reality quickly set in. A mass shooting was unfolding on a U.S. military base. The scale of the attack was unprecedented, and the ensuing chaos made it difficult to piece together what was happening in real time. Communication was hampered by the sheer panic, and the first responders faced a scene of utter carnage. The perpetrator was identified as Major Nidal Hasan, a U.S. Army psychiatrist stationed at Fort Hood. Hasan, a Muslim American of Palestinian descent, had been working at the base for several years. Reports surfaced later indicating he had expressed extremist views in the past and had been in contact with known radical figures. These revelations would later fuel intense debate about potential warning signs missed by the military and whether the attack could have been prevented. In the immediate aftermath, however, the focus was on identifying the shooter and bringing the situation under control. The shooting lasted for approximately 10 minutes, a terrifying eternity for those trapped in the Soldier Readiness Processing Center. Witnesses described Hasan moving methodically through the building, firing at soldiers and civilians alike. He was armed with 2 handguns, a FN-57 pistol, and a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver, and reportedly reloaded several times during the attack. 13 people were killed, and more than 30 were wounded, making it the deadliest mass shooting on a U.S. military installation in history. The victims included soldiers preparing for deployment, medical personnel, and civilian contractors. Their stories, which we will explore in later segments, represent the devastating human cost of this tragedy. Among the deceased were Specialist Frederick Green, preparing for his first deployment, and Private First Class Francesca Velez, who was pregnant at the time. Their lives, along with the others lost that day, were cut short in a place they believed to be safe, a place dedicated to serving their country. The scene inside the processing center was described by first responders as horrific. The sheer number of casualties, combined with the chaotic nature of the attack, presented an immense challenge for medical personnel. Many of the wounded suffered life-altering injuries, and the emotional toll on survivors was immeasurable. The Fort Hood shooting exposed vulnerabilities in military-based security and raised questions about the adequacy of mental health care within the armed forces. Law enforcement officers engaged Hasan, ultimately shooting him multiple times and bringing the rampage to an end. He was paralyzed from the waist down as a result of the injuries he sustained. He was taken into custody and later charged with 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder. The investigation that followed was complex and involved multiple agencies. The FBI took the lead, working alongside Army investigators to piece together the events leading up to the shooting and determine Hasan's motives. As details emerged about Hasan's extremist views and his communication with known radicals, the attack began to be viewed within the broader context of terrorism. This raised complex questions about the nature of the crime and whether it should be classified as an act of terrorism or workplace violence. These questions would have significant implications for the victims' families and their pursuit of justice, which we'll discuss in the upcoming segments. The air in Fort Hood that afternoon was thick, with a silence more profound than any I've ever encountered. The echo of the gunshots, though fading, seemed to linger in the collective consciousness of everyone present. The scene, as described by first responders, was chaotic and horrific. Soldiers, many of whom had recently returned from deployments overseas, now found themselves in a war zone on their own base. The immediate reaction was a mix of disbelief and terror. People scattered, seeking cover where they could. Medics rushed to aid the wounded, while military police tried to secure the area, unsure if the threat was still active. The base went into lockdown, a chilling realization that the place meant to be a sanctuary had been violated in the most devastating way. The sense of security shattered, replaced by an unnerving fear that rippled through the community. The initial reports were fragmented, often conflicting. The number of casualties was unclear, and the identity of the shooter remained a mystery, adding to the pervasive sense of dread. Families of soldiers stationed at Fort Hood anxiously awaited news, clinging to hope while bracing for the worst. The fear wasn't confined to the base itself. It spread like wildfire throughout the surrounding communities and across the nation. This wasn't just an attack on a military installation. It was an attack on the very idea of safety and security within the armed forces. The incident brought back chilling echoes of past tragedies and highlighted the vulnerability even within seemingly secure environments. The nation watched in horror, grappling with the enormity of the event and its implications. The uncertainty fueled speculation and amplified the fear. Everyone was asking the same questions. Who was responsible, and why had this happened? Witness testimonies paint a particularly harrowing picture of the immediate aftermath. One soldier described seeing colleagues fall around him, the sounds of gunfire and screams echoing in his ears. Another recounted the frantic search for safety, the desperate scramble to find cover amidst the chaos. These accounts underscore the raw terror and confusion that gripped the base in those initial moments. The scene inside the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, where the shooting primarily occurred, was described as a scene of unimaginable carnage. The building, typically bustling with activity and anticipation of deployments or homecomings, was transformed into a site of unspeakable violence. The contrast only amplified the tragedy. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of blood, a grim reminder of the lives lost and forever altered. The attack left an indelible mark on Fort Hood, a scar that would take years to heal. The sense of community, once a source of strength and resilience, was deeply fractured. Trust eroded as soldiers grappled with the realization that the threat had come from within. The fear was palpable, a heavy blanket that settled over the base and its surrounding communities. It permeated everyday life, altering routines and interactions. The simple act of going to work, once taken for granted, now carried an undercurrent of anxiety. The attack forced a reassessment of security protocols and raised difficult questions about the mental health of service members. It became a tragic turning point, exposing vulnerabilities and underscoring the need for greater vigilance and support within the military community. The shadows of that day continue to linger, a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring impact of violence. Let's delve deeper into the psychology of Major Nidal Hasan, the perpetrator of the Fort Hood shooting. Hasan was an Army psychiatrist, a man entrusted with the mental well-being of soldiers. This position of care contrasts sharply with the violence he unleashed. Reports and witness testimonies paint a picture of a man struggling internally. Some colleagues described him as quiet and reserved, even socially awkward, while others noted instances of concerning behavior, such as proselytizing his religious beliefs to patients, which raised red flags about his professional conduct. Understanding this apparent contradiction between his outward role as a healer and his inner turmoil is crucial to piecing together the puzzle of his motivations. We need to explore the possibility that these internal conflicts, coupled with external pressures, may have contributed to his radicalization and the eventual eruption of violence. The complexities of Hasan's personality are indeed baffling. On the surface, he was a highly educated medical professional, an officer in the United States Army, seemingly dedicated to serving his country. Yet beneath this facade, a darker picture emerges. Evidence suggests a growing discontent with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, conflicts he openly opposed. He reportedly expressed fears of being deployed and having to potentially participate in actions he viewed as morally wrong. This moral conflict, combined with reports of harassment and discrimination he faced within the military due to his Muslim faith, created a volatile internal environment. It's important to consider how these factors might have interacted to create a sense of alienation and resentment, potentially pushing him toward extremism. It's a complex interplay of personal beliefs, professional pressures, and perceived injustices that we need to unravel. Absolutely. And we must also consider the digital trail Hasan left behind. His online activity revealed communication with Anwar al-Awlaki, a known extremist cleric. These communications, while not explicitly advocating violence, suggest a growing affinity for radical ideology. This adds another layer to the psychological profile we're building. Here we see a man outwardly conforming to the expectations of his profession, yet simultaneously engaging in covert communication that hints at a deeper, more troubling mindset. The apparent disconnect between his public persona and his private actions underscores the difficulty in predicting such acts of violence. It raises the question of whether there were missed signals, opportunities for intervention, that could have potentially prevented the tragedy. The exploration of Hasan's online activities provides a critical piece of the puzzle. It points towards a gradual process of radicalization, possibly fueled by a combination of personal grievances and exposure to extremist ideologies. While the exact nature of his communication with al-Awlaki remains a subject of debate, it undeniably suggests an increasing identification with a worldview that justified violence. This seemingly contradictory behavior, maintaining a professional demeanor while embracing radical ideas, highlights the challenges in identifying individuals at risk of committing such acts. It begs the question, how can we better understand the psychological processes that lead someone down the path of extremism, especially when those processes are hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy? Let's delve into the intricacies of the Fort Hood investigation. The scale of the event, with 13 dead and over 30 injured, presented an immediate challenge. The scene was chaotic. A sprawling military base transformed into a horrific tableau. Securing the area, identifying victims, and collecting evidence was a monumental task. Initially, the sheer number of witnesses seemed promising, but their accounts often conflicted due to the pandemonium. The focus naturally gravitated towards Major Nidal Hasan himself, quickly apprehended after being shot by military police. Yet, understanding his motive and whether he acted alone became the central question. This led to a deep dive into his background, communications, and psychological state, searching for clues. Did investigators overlook potential warning signs? Were there any missed leads that could have prevented the tragedy? The investigation certainly faced its share of complexities. One crucial aspect was analyzing Hasan's digital footprint. Investigators scoured his computer, emails, and online activity, looking for evidence of premeditation, extremist connections, or any indication of his planned attack. Reports surfaced about his communication with Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical cleric, which raised concerns about a broader network or influence. However, definitively linking these communications to the shooting proved difficult. This also raised questions about whether Hasan was radicalized through these interactions, or if they were simply part of his broader research and exploration of his beliefs. Deciphering the meaning and intent behind his communications became a crucial, yet challenging, aspect of the investigation. The sheer volume of data to analyze, coupled with the need to understand its context, undoubtedly consumed significant resources. The search for a clear motive was further complicated by Hasan's invocation of his right to remain silent. This presented a considerable obstacle for investigators, limiting their ability to directly question him about his actions and reasoning. They had to rely on circumstantial evidence, witness testimonies, and the digital trail he left behind. The investigation also explored whether the shooting was an act of terrorism or workplace violence, a distinction with significant legal and political ramifications. This distinction hinges on whether Hasan's actions were motivated by religious or political ideology, or by personal grievances related to his work environment. Establishing this with certainty proved challenging, given the complex interplay of factors potentially at play. The investigation also involved reconstructing the timeline leading up to the shooting. This involved interviewing colleagues, reviewing Hasan's work performance, and examining his personal life. Were there any warning signs that might have been missed? Did anyone observe changes in his behavior or expressions of discontent? The investigation into the Fort Hood shooting wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was also about understanding the context in which this tragedy unfolded. The aim was to not only establish what happened, but also why it happened, hoping to prevent similar incidents in the future. This required a meticulous examination of all available information, seeking to connect disparate pieces of the puzzle. The investigation continued for years, exploring various avenues and seeking to bring closure to the victims, their families, and the community. The Fort Hood shooting left an enduring scar on the victims, their families, and the entire community. Beyond the immediate casualties and physical injuries, the psychological and emotional trauma continues to reverberate. Many survivors grapple with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression, struggling to regain a sense of normalcy in their lives. Families shattered by the loss of loved ones face the arduous journey of grief and the added burden of navigating legal and bureaucratic processes to secure benefits and support. The sense of safety and security within the Fort Hood community was deeply shaken. The realization that such violence could erupt within a supposedly secure military installation created an atmosphere of fear and distrust, impacting morale and interpersonal relationships. The emotional toll extends far beyond the individuals directly affected by the shooting. The incident sent shockwaves through the nation, raising questions about the adequacy of mental health services within the military and the potential warning signs that might have been missed. The prolonged investigations and subsequent trials reopened wounds for the victims and their families, forcing them to relive the horrific events. The media coverage, while necessary for public awareness, often intensified the suffering by intruding on their privacy and sensationalizing the tragedy. The long-term consequences of such a traumatic event are difficult to quantify, but the impact on the collective psyche of the community and the nation is undeniable. For the families of the victims, the pain is a constant companion. They struggle with the unanswered questions, the what-ifs, and the agonizing realization that their loved ones were taken from them in such a senseless act of violence. The loss of a parent, spouse, or child creates a void that can never be filled, leaving families to grapple with their grief for years to come. The ripple effects of this tragedy continue to spread, impacting subsequent generations and shaping the community's identity. The Fort Hood shooting serves as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violence and the importance of providing comprehensive support for victims and their families in the aftermath of such events. The community around Fort Hood, including the nearby towns of Killeen and Copperas Cove, experienced a collective trauma. These communities are deeply intertwined with the military base, with many residents having personal connections to those who serve. The shooting created a sense of shared vulnerability and loss, as neighbors mourned together and struggled to comprehend the violence that had erupted within their midst. The incident also strained relationships between the military and civilian communities, as questions arose about communication and security protocols. Rebuilding trust and fostering a sense of unity in the aftermath of the tragedy became a crucial but challenging undertaking. The weeks leading up to the shooting painted a disturbing picture of Hasan's escalating mental instability. Colleagues reported increasingly erratic behavior, marked by outbursts and expressions of extremist views. His presentations to fellow medical personnel often strayed from the expected curriculum, delving into his personal interpretations of religious conflict and justification for violence against military personnel. Some witnesses recall him expressing admiration for individuals known for terrorist activities, which raised concerns, but these were seemingly not effectively communicated up the chain of command. The fragmented nature of the information and the reluctance to label a fellow officer as a potential threat contributed to a critical delay in intervention, a delay with devastating consequences. The warning signs were present, scattered like pieces of a tragic puzzle waiting to be assembled. The sheer volume of evidence gathered from Hasan's apartment, his computer, and his communications provided a chilling insight into his mindset. Searches revealed a vast library of extremist literature, online forums dedicated to radical ideologies, and direct communication with individuals known for inciting violence. While the material found provided substantial evidence of his radicalization, it also raised questions about the potential failure of intelligence agencies to identify and intercept these communications. The sheer volume of data makes it a daunting task, yet the question remains: could more have been done? Could the tragedy at Fort Hood have been averted if the dots had been connected sooner? On the morning of November 5, 2009, Hasan entered the Soldier Readiness Processing Center armed with 2 handguns. The center, a bustling hub of activity, was filled with soldiers preparing for deployment or returning home. The methodical and targeted nature of the attack is evident in eyewitness accounts. Survivors described a scene of chaos and terror as Hasan moved systematically through the building, firing on unarmed soldiers. The air was filled with the screams of the wounded and the deafening echo of gunfire. The attack lasted approximately 10 minutes before civilian police officers engaged and neutralized Hasan. He was shot multiple times and left paralyzed from the waist down. The arrest of Major Nidal Hasan was swift, occurring at the scene of the shooting itself. His capture marked the beginning of a long and complex legal process, one fraught with delays and appeals. The sheer scale of the crime, coupled with the military context, presented unique legal challenges. The decision to try Hasan in a military court rather than a civilian court sparked significant debate. Arguments centered on jurisdiction, the potential for bias within the military justice system, and the implications for future cases involving acts of terrorism by military personnel. The legal battle would stretch on for years, adding another layer of complexity to an already devastating tragedy. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Major Nidal Hasan, an army psychiatrist entrusted with the mental well-being of soldiers, turns on those very individuals he swore to protect. The sheer scale of the carnage within the confines of a supposedly safe military base, Fort Hood, is deeply disturbing. 13 lives extinguished, over 30 others wounded, and an entire community scarred forever. Hasan's meticulous planning, the premeditation evident in his actions, paints a picture of a man consumed by a dark ideology. He even reportedly shouted, "Allahu Akbar," before opening fire, a phrase typically associated with celebration, twisted into a chilling war cry. This act wasn't a sudden outburst. It was a calculated assault, executed with terrifying efficiency, in a place where such violence seemed unimaginable. The fact that it happened in 2009, a time of heightened security following 9/11, adds another layer of complexity to this already devastating narrative. Absolutely. And what makes this case even more unsettling is the apparent breakdown in communication and preventative measures. Reports suggest that warning signs existed prior to the attack. Hasan's colleagues had expressed concerns about his increasingly radical views and erratic behavior. Some reports even indicated that he had communicated with known extremist figures. Yet, these red flags seem to have been missed, dismissed, or simply not acted upon effectively. The subsequent investigations and reviews revealed systemic failures within the military's intelligence and security apparatus, raising serious questions about whether the tragedy could have been averted. The fact that the shooting took place in a soldier readiness processing center, a place where soldiers were preparing for deployment, heightens the sense of betrayal and vulnerability. These individuals were about to embark on missions to protect their country, and they were tragically struck down on their own soil by one of their own. The Fort Hood shooting forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, disguised behind a veneer of normalcy. Hasan was a highly educated professional, a medical doctor, someone entrusted with the care of others. Yet beneath the surface, a dangerous ideology festered, ultimately leading to an act of horrific violence. This case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, the need for effective communication, and the crucial role of early intervention when dealing with potential threats. The scars of that day remain deep, a testament to the devastating consequences of unchecked extremism and the enduring human cost of such senseless violence. Indeed. And perhaps the most haunting question that lingers, even now, is, could it happen again? Have we truly learned the lessons of Fort Hood? Are we better equipped to identify and address potential threats hidden within our own ranks, within our own communities? The answers to these questions remain elusive, leaving us with a chilling sense of unease and a profound responsibility to remain vigilant in the face of potential danger. Thank you for walking with us through the shadows. The story doesn't end here. It lingers, echoing through time, reminding us that the darkest truths often hide in plain sight. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant. This case remains unsolved. Perhaps the truth is still out there,